The alarm clock screamed at 4:47 a.m., 3 minutes before it was supposed to. Sarah Mitchell's hand shot out from under the thin blanket and slammed it silent. Her body ached in that deep, bone-tired way that comes from working 2 jobs and sleeping 4 hours. The night shift at Mercy General Hospital had ended at 3 a.m. She'd taken the last bus home, walked 3 blocks in the dark because the street light on Maple was out again, and collapsed into bed at 3:40 a.m. Now it was Saturday morning, her one day off from the diner, her one morning in 7 that she didn't have to be anywhere. Except she did, because today was Emma's day. Sarah pulled herself upright, every muscle protesting. The apartment was cold. The heat had been shut off twice this month because she'd paid the electric bill instead. She wrapped a robe around her shoulders and padded barefoot across the worn carpet to the second bedroom, Emma's room. The door was painted yellow. Sarah had done it herself 3 years ago when Emma asked if butterflies lived in yellow houses. The paint was chipping now, but Sarah hadn't had time to fix it. She pushed the door open quietly. Emma was still asleep, 5 years old, blonde curls spread across a pillow that had seen better days. One small hand curled under her chin. The other clutched a stuffed rabbit that was missing an ear. Her face in sleep was perfect, peaceful, unmarked by the world that had been so unkind to her little body. Sarah stood in the doorway and watched her daughter breathe. Emma Grace Mitchell had been born on a Tuesday in March during a snowstorm that shut down half of Nashville. The doctors knew something was wrong before she even took her first breath. The ultrasounds had shown it, a congenital deformity of the right leg, tibial hemimelia they called it. The tibia, the main bone in the lower leg, had never fully formed. The doctors said she'd never walk without assistance. Sarah said they were wrong. Emma's father said he couldn't handle it. His name was Ryan Cooper. He'd been Sarah's boyfriend for 2 years. They talked about marriage, about a house with a word and a call and weekend barbecues. Then the ultrasound technician went quiet and called in a specialist. And Ryan sat in that hospital room and listened to words like disability and lifelong care and significant medical expenses. He left 3 days before Emma was born. Sarah never heard from him again. No child support, no birthday cards, no apologies. Just a text message that said, "I can't do this. I'm sorry." 5 years later, Sarah still had that text saved in her phone. She didn't know why. Maybe as a reminder, maybe as fuel, maybe because some part of her needed to remember that the world could be that cruel so she'd never be surprised by it again. She walked into Emma's room and sat gently on the edge of the bed. "Baby," she whispered, brushing a curl from Emma's forehead. "Time to wake up." Emma's eyes fluttered open. Blue, so blue they looked like pieces of summer sky. "Mama," her voice was thick with sleep. "Good morning, sunshine." Emma smiled. That smile, the one that started somewhere deep in her belly and pushed its way up until her whole face glowed. The smile that made Sarah believe in God even when she was angry at him. "Is today the pancake day?" Emma asked. Sarah's chest tightened. She'd promised Emma a month ago, one special Saturday. Pancakes at Dawson's Diner. The place with the red booths and the jukebox that played Elvis. The place where other families went on Saturday mornings to eat and laugh and be normal. Sarah had $47 in her wallet. That was it. $47 until her next paycheck, which was 5 days away. Rent was paid, electric was paid, but groceries were thin. The refrigerator held half a gallon of milk, 3 eggs, and a block of cheese that was starting to mold. $47. Pancakes would cost 12, maybe 15 with tip. That left $32 for 5 days. Sarah looked at her daughter's face, at the hope in those blue eyes, at the way Emma's fingers gripped the bedsheet in anticipation. "Yes, baby," Sarah said. "Today's the pancake day." Emma squealed and threw her arms around Sarah's neck. An hour later, they stood at the bus stop on the corner of 5th and Brennan. Emma wore her favorite blue dress, the one with the little white daisies on the hem. Sarah had washed it by hand last night and hung it to dry over the bathtub. It was still slightly damp, but Emma didn't notice. She was too busy watching a butterfly land on the fence across the street. "Mama, look!" She pointed with her free hand. The other held her pink crutch, the one with the rubber grip that squeaked when she walked. "I see it, baby. It's yellow, like my room." "It is. Do you think it lives in a yellow house?" Sarah smiled despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. "Maybe. I hope so. Yellow houses are the best." The bus came wheezing around the corner, belching black smoke. It was the number 12, the one that ran from East Nashville to downtown. Sarah helped Emma up the steps. Emma's right leg, the one that ended in a brace and a specially built shoe, dragged slightly. She'd learned to compensate, to swing her hip and pull the leg through. But it took effort. Every step took effort. A man in a business suit glanced at Emma and then quickly looked away. A teenage girl with headphones stared openly until her mother elbowed her. Sarah felt the familiar burn in her chest, the anger that lived right beneath her ribs, ready to ignite at any moment. She wanted to scream at these people, to make them look, to make them see that her daughter was a human being, not a spectacle. But she didn't. She just guided Emma to a seat by the window and sat down beside her. Emma pressed her nose against the glass and watched the world go by. Dawson's Diner sat on the corner of Main Street and Harper Avenue. It had been there for 43 years. The sign out front was faded, the paint on the building was peeling, but inside it smelled like coffee and bacon and cinnamon rolls. It smelled like Saturday mornings were supposed to smell. Sarah pushed through the door at 8:17 a.m. The bell above the door jingled. Emma hobbled in behind her, one hand gripping her crutch, the other reaching for her mother's fingers. The diner was half full, regulars mostly, old men who came in for coffee and complained about the government, young couples trying to cure hangovers with greasy food, a family with 3 kids who were throwing hash browns at each other while their mother scrolled through her phone. Behind the counter stood Ruth Morrison, 65 years old, silver hair pulled back in a bun, apron stained with 23 years of coffee spills and pie filling. She'd worked at Dawson's longer than most of the town's residents had been alive. She knew every regular by name, every stranger by the look in their eyes. When she saw Emma struggling through the door, something in Ruth's chest shifted. She'd seen a lot of children come through this diner. Loud ones, messy ones, ones who threw tantrums and knocked over syrup dispensers. But this little girl with the blonde curls and the pink crutch and the smile that could light up a room, this one was different. Ruth grabbed 2 menus and came around the counter. "Well, good morning," she said, her voice warm as the coffee in the pot. "Aren't you just about the prettiest thing that's walked through that door all week?" Emma's smile got bigger. "We're getting pancakes," she announced. "Is that so?" Ruth winked at Sarah. "Then I better put you in the best booth in the house." She led them to a corner booth by the window. The vinyl was cracked but clean. The table was small but sturdy. Sunlight streamed through the glass, warm and golden. Emma slid onto the seat and propped her crutch against the table. She immediately reached into her little backpack and pulled out a piece of paper and a box of crayons. "What are you drawing today?" Sarah asked. "A butterfly," Emma said, already pressing a yellow crayon to the paper. "With big wings so it can fly really, really far." Sarah watched her daughter's small hand move across the page. For one quiet moment, everything was perfect. The diner was warm. The coffee smelled good. Emma was happy. Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, today would be a good day. She should have known better. 43 miles away, in a garage that smelled like motor oil and old leather, Jack Morrison was standing over the grave of his daughter. Not literally. Lily had been buried in Greenwood Cemetery on the east side of Nashville. Her headstone was pink granite with a butterfly carved into the top. Jack visited every Saturday. Same time, same routine. He'd sit on the grass beside her, rest his hand on the stone and talk. About his week, about the weather, about the charity ride coming up, about the hole in his chest that 15 years hadn't filled. But this morning, Jack wasn't at the cemetery. He was in his garage staring at a photograph. Lily at age 6, blonde hair and pigtails, blue dress with yellow flowers, standing next to a bicycle that was too big for her, grinning at the camera with a smile that showed the gap in her front teeth. Jack's wife, Carol, had taken the picture 3 days before the accident. 3 days before a drunk driver ran a red light and killed their daughter. 3 days before Jack's entire world collapsed into a black hole that nothing, not time, not therapy, not the brotherhood of the Hells Angels could pull him out of. He set the photograph down on his workbench and picked up his vest. Leather, black, worn soft from 32 years of riding. The Hells Angels insignia on the back, the patches on the front. Each one told a story. Each one represented a mile ridden, a brother saved, a promise kept. Jack pulled the vest on and zipped it. His phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Ruth, his younger sister. The only family he had left. Their parents were gone. Carol was gone. Lily was gone. Just Ruth and the brotherhood. He answered, "Yeah." "Jack," Ruth's voice was tight, strained. "I need you." Jack straightened. Ruth didn't call unless it was serious. "What happened?" "I'm at the diner. A boy just hit a little girl." "Hit her, Jack?" "Across the face. She's 5 years old. She's disabled. She's got a brace on her leg and a pink crutch. And this boy, this 17-year-old punk, slapped her and called her a cripple." Jack's hand tightened on the phone. "Is she okay?" "No, she's not okay. She's sitting here crying with a handprint on her face and nobody did a damn thing." 12 people in this diner, Jack. 12. And not one of them stood up. Not one. Jack closed his eyes, breathed through his nose. "Where's the boy now?" "Gone." Walked out laughing. "You call the cops." "His father is Gerald Marsh." Jack went still. Everyone in the county knew Gerald Marsh. Real estate developer. Owned half the commercial property in town. Had enough money to bury anyone who crossed him. Had enough lawyers to make any problem disappear. Marsh's kid Jack said quietly, "Yeah." "How old did you say the girl was?" 5. "And she's disabled." "Leg brace, crutch, blonde hair, blue eyes." Ruth paused. "Jack, she looks like Lily." The words hit him like a fist to the chest. He opened his eyes, looked at the photograph on the workbench. Lily's smile, the gap in her teeth, the yellow flowers on her dress. "Jack, you there?" "Yeah." His voice came out rough. "I'm here." She asked her mama if she was broken. Jack's throat closed. He set the phone down for a second, pressed his palms flat on the workbench, breathed. 15 years. 15 years since he'd buried his daughter. 15 years since he'd made a promise over her tiny headstone that her death would mean something, that he would spend the rest of his life protecting the children he couldn't protect that day. He picked the phone back up. "Don't let her leave the diner." "How long?" 45 minutes, maybe less." "Jack." "Yeah?" Ruth's voice cracked. She asked her mama if she was broken. Jack's eyes burned. "I'm on my way." He hung up. For a moment, he just stood there. Then he walked to the phone mounted on the garage wall and started dialing. The first call went to a man named David Cooper. Everyone called him Diesel. Diesel answered on the first ring. "Brother, I need everybody," Jack said, "right now." "What's the situation?" "A teenage boy just assaulted a disabled 5-year-old girl in front of a diner full of people. Hit her across the face. Called her a cripple. Nobody stopped him." Silence on the other end. Then Diesel's voice came back harder. How many you need? All of them. Give me 15 minutes. The call started. Diesel called Wrench. Wrench called Tombstone. Tombstone called Preacher. Preacher called Hawk. On and on, one by one across the county. Phones rang in garages and kitchens and living rooms. Men put down their coffee, kissed their wives, reached for their vests. Logan Harris was feeding his 2-year-old daughter breakfast when his phone buzzed. He was 30, the youngest full member of the chapter. Built like a refrigerator but gentle enough to braid his little girl's hair every morning. His wife Maya watched him read the text, saw his face change. "Go," she said. "It's a kid," Logan said, his voice thick. 5 years old. Some punk hit her. Maya's eyes hardened. "Then go. Now." Logan kissed his daughter's forehead, grabbed his jacket, was on his bike in under 3 minutes. Across town, a man named Earl Thompson got the call. Everyone called him Bones. He was 62, retired iron worker, grandfather of 4. He was sitting on his porch when Diesel's voice came through the phone. Bones listened without speaking. When Diesel finished, Bones said one word, "Where?" Then he hung up and walked to his garage. His wife called after him from the screen door. "Earl, your doctor said no riding until your back heals." Bones pulled on his gloves. "My back can wait. That little girl can't." The calls kept going. Men who hadn't ridden in weeks pulled covers off their bikes. Men who had plans canceled them. Men who barely knew each other's real names but would die for each other suited up without a second thought. In 32 minutes, 65 motorcycles were on the road. They rode in formation, a river of chrome and leather cutting through the gray November morning. The sky threatened rain. The air was cold, but the engines were warm, and the purpose was clear. Big Jack Morrison rode at the front. His silver beard caught the wind. His eyes were locked on the road ahead. His hands gripped the handlebars so tight his knuckles went white. Behind him, 64 men who had answered a simple call. A child was hurt, and no one helped her. That was enough. That was always enough. They didn't speak. The engine spoke for them, a deep rolling thunder that shook windows and turned heads in every town they passed through. A woman at a gas station pulled out her phone and started recording. A group of children on a school playground pressed their faces against the fence, eyes wide. 65 motorcycles, 65 men, riding through the cold for a little girl they'd never met. Logan rode 3 rows back. Rain was starting to fall. He kept thinking about his daughter, about her laugh, about the way she said "Daddy" when she was scared. He thought about what he would do if someone hit her, and his grip tightened on the handlebars until his knuckles went white. Diesel rode at Jack's right shoulder, where he always rode. He hadn't said a word since they'd left, but his jaw was set like concrete. He'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan, seen things that broke other men, but something about a child being hurt in a place that was supposed to be safe, a diner for God's sake, a place where kids eat pancakes, hit him in a way that combat never did. Because in war, you expect cruelty. In a diner on a Saturday morning, you don't. They were 12 minutes out when Jack's phone rang through his helmet speaker. "Ruth, where are you?" "Close. How's the girl?" "She fell asleep on her mama's lap." "Jack, she's so small. You should see her. She's got this little pink crutch and a butterfly drawing she taped back together after that boy ripped it up." Jack's throat tightened. "You still there?" "I'm here. There's something else. The boy, Tyler, he told me his dad would get me fired, and he might. Gerald Marsh owns this building. Let me worry about Gerald Marsh." "Jack, I'm serious. That man is dangerous. He's got lawyers, money, connections. If you go after his son..." "Ruth," Jack's voice cut through like a blade. "I'm not going after his son. I'm going to stand in front of a 5-year-old girl and make sure nobody ever touches her again. If Gerald Marsh has a problem with that, he can come find me himself." Ruth went quiet. Then she said softly, "She reminds me of Lily." Jack closed his eyes for half a second. Rain hit his face. Somewhere inside his chest, a door he kept locked swung open just a crack, and the pain came flooding through. His daughter's face, her laugh, the way she used to run to him when he came home, arms wide open, shouting "Daddy" in that voice that made the whole world disappear. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm coming." He hung up and opened the throttle. The engine roared louder. Behind him, 64 bikes matched his speed. The formation tightened. The sound grew into something that felt less like noise and more like a promise. Back at Dawson's diner, Sarah hadn't moved. Emma was curled against her chest, one small hand still gripping the taped butterfly drawing, the other clutching Sarah's shirt. The red mark on her cheek had deepened into a bruise. Sarah kept touching it gently, as if her fingers could somehow undo what had been done. Ruth brought her a cup of coffee. Sarah shook her head. "I can't." "Drink it," Ruth said. "You need to be steady for what's coming." Sarah looked at her. "What do you mean, what's coming?" Ruth sat down across from her. "My brother is bringing his club, the Hells Angels. They're on their way." Sarah's face went pale. "How many?" "All of them." "Ruth, I don't want trouble. I just want to take Emma home and—" "Sarah." Ruth reached across the table and took her hand. "These men aren't coming to start trouble. They're coming because a child was hurt. And that's something they don't tolerate. Not ever." Sarah looked down at Emma's sleeping face. "She's going to be scared. All those big men on motorcycles. She'll be terrified." Ruth shook her head. "Trust me, when Jack walks through that door, you'll understand." The diner had emptied out. Most of the morning customers had left, some quickly, some with their heads down. The shame of what they'd witnessed, what they hadn't done, followed them out like a shadow. Only 3 people remained besides Sarah and Emma. Walter Green, 81 years old. He'd been coming to Dawson's every Saturday for 11 years. He sat in his usual booth, hands folded on the table, head down. Abby Reynolds, 26, worked at the library. She'd been crying quietly in her booth since the incident. Her phone was in her hand, recording app still open. And Miguel Reyes, the cook. He'd finally come out of the kitchen, standing by the counter with his arms crossed and his eyes red. "I should have come out sooner," Miguel said to Ruth. "I heard what was happening and I froze. I just froze." Ruth put a hand on his shoulder. "You're here now." "That's not enough," Miguel said, his voice cracking. "That little girl was getting hit, and I was standing behind a kitchen door." The guilt in the diner was thick enough to choke on. Every person who had been there carried a piece of it. Walter, who had gripped his table but never stood up. The young couple who had stared at their phones. The man who had put money on his table and walked out. They all knew. They all felt it. The weight of watching and doing nothing. Then Emma stirred. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking, disoriented. For a moment she didn't remember. Then it came back. The boys, the laughter, the slap. And her face crumpled. "Mama, I'm here, baby. I'm right here. Can we go home?" "Soon, sweetheart, soon." Emma pressed closer to her mother. "I don't want to come here anymore. I don't want to go anywhere anymore." Sarah's heart fractured along a fault line she didn't know existed. Her daughter, her brave, stubborn, butterfly-drawing daughter, was retreating from the world at 5 years old because of one cruel boy in a room full of silent adults. Ruth heard it from behind the counter. She closed her eyes, steadied herself against the edge of the sink. Then she felt it before she heard it. A vibration, low and deep, coming up through the floor, through the walls, through the coffee cups rattling softly on their saucers. It grew steadily, like distant thunder rolling closer. The windows began to hum. The sugar shakers on the table started to tremble. Miguel looked up. "What the hell is that?" Walter set down his coffee cup. "Engines," he said. Ruth straightened up, wiped her hands on her apron, took a deep breath. "They're here." Sarah felt it too. The vibration moved through the booth, through her body, through Emma, who lifted her head from her mother's chest and looked toward the window with wide eyes. Mama, what's that sound? I don't know, baby. But Ruth knew. She walked to the window and looked out. The parking lot was filling up, one motorcycle after another pulling in through the light rain, their headlights cutting through the gray like 65 pairs of golden eyes. The riders were big, leather vests dark with rain, boots heavy, faces hard. They parked their bikes in rows, engines dying one by one until the last rumble faded into silence. Then they began to walk toward the door. All of them, 65 men in leather and chain, crossing the wet parking lot in a formation that felt less like a group and more like an army. Sarah pulled Emma closer. Her instincts screamed at her, protect, shield, run. These were the kind of men she would normally cross a street to avoid. Everything about them said danger. Ruth, Sarah whispered. Ruth, I'm scared. Ruth turned from the window. She wasn't scared. Her eyes were glistening, but she wasn't scared. Don't be, she said. That's my brother out front, and he's here for Emma. The door opened. The bell jingled, but nobody heard it over the sound of boots. Big Jack Morrison walked in first. He filled the doorway. 6'3", 240 pounds, silver beard dripping with rain, tattoos running from his knuckles to his neck. Behind him, Diesel, then Logan, then Wrench, Tombstone, Preacher, Hawk, Bones, on and on. Filing in one after another, filling the diner like a tide of leather and iron. The diner couldn't hold all 65. About 30 came inside. The rest stood outside in the rain, arms crossed, silent, watching the road, watching for Tyler, watching for Gerald Marsh, watching for anything or anyone who might try to hurt that little girl again. Jack's eyes found Ruth first. He walked to her and pulled her into a hug that lifted her off the ground. I'm fine, Ruth said. It's not me you need to worry about. Jack set her down and turned. His eyes swept the diner until they found the booth by the window. Sarah sat rigid, arms wrapped around Emma, eyes wide with fear. And Emma, small, blonde, trembling, peeked out from behind her mother's arm and stared at the wall of bikers with an expression that was half terror, half wonder. Jack's chest tightened. The blonde curls, the blue eyes, the tiny pink crutch leaning against the table. For one terrible, beautiful moment, he saw Lily. Not the Lily in the photographs, frozen forever at 6 years old, but Lily alive, sitting in a diner booth, scared and small, and needing someone to tell her she was going to be okay. He took a breath. Then he walked toward the booth, slowly, deliberately, making sure his boots didn't stomp, making sure his body language said, safe, not threat. The other bikers stayed back. They understood. This was Jack's moment. He stopped 3 feet from the table. Sarah's grip on Emma tightened. Jack saw it and didn't come any closer. Ma'am, he said softly, my name is Jack. Ruth is my sister. She called me. I know you're scared right now, and I know we probably look like the last people in the world you want around your daughter. But I promise you, I swear on everything I love, we are not here to cause trouble. We are here because a child was hurt. And where we come from, that's something you don't ignore. Sarah studied his face. She was looking for the lie, the angle, the catch. She'd learned the hard way that people who offered help usually wanted something in return. But Jack's eyes held nothing but pain, old pain, the kind that never fully heals. Your sister told me about your daughter, Pharaoh whispered. I'm sorry. Jack's jaw tightened. He nodded once. Her name was Lily. She'd be 21 this year. He paused. She looked a lot like your girl. Emma was watching him. She'd stopped hiding behind Sarah's arm. Her blue eyes were locked on Jack's face, studying him the way children study everything, with total unfiltered attention. Jack crouched down. His knees protested 60 years of hard living, but he got himself low enough that his eyes were level with Emma's. He didn't reach for her. He didn't crowd her. He just knelt there, a massive man making himself small for a little girl. "Hey there," he said, his voice so gentle it barely sounded like the same person. "I heard you like butterflies." Emma blinked. She looked down at the taped drawing still clutched in her hand. Then she looked back at Jack. She nodded. "Can I see?" Emma hesitated. She looked at Sarah. Sarah was watching Jack's face like a hawk watching a field, reading every micro-expression, every tiny movement. Something in his eyes, that old deep pain, made her nod slightly. Emma held out the drawing, carefully, like it was made of glass. Jack took it with both hands. He looked at the butterfly, yellow wings, a crooked smile drawn in crayon, a tape line running through the middle where it had been torn and put back together. He stared at it for a long time, longer than made sense for a crayon drawing on notebook paper. "You know what I see," he said finally. Emma shook her head. "I see a butterfly that got hurt. Somebody tried to break it. But look, it's still here. It's still got its wings. It's still got its smile." He handed it back to her. "That's one tough butterfly." Emma took the drawing and held it against her chest. Her lip was trembling, but she wasn't crying. She was looking at Jack with an expression that no 5-year-old should ever have to wear. The desperate, searching look of a child trying to decide if it's safe to trust again. "Those boys said I was broken," she whispered. Jack's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. Something dark and fierce that he kept carefully hidden from the child in front of him. "Can I tell you a secret?" he said. Emma nodded. Jack leaned in slightly. "I've got 64 brothers standing in this room and outside in that parking lot right now. Big, tough guys. Guys with tattoos and loud motorcycles and leather jackets. You want to know something about them?" "What?" "Every single one of them has been called broken at some point in their life. Every single one. And you know what they did?" Emma shook her head. "They kept going. They got up. They rode on." Jack's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "That's what strong people do, sweetheart. They don't stop, no matter what anybody calls them." Emma looked past Jack at the bikers filling the diner. Diesel, arms crossed, face like granite, but his eyes soft as he looked at her. Logan, who had tears on his cheeks and wasn't bothering to hide them. Bones, 62 years old, leaning on the counter with hands that had built bridges and held grandchildren. Preacher, a former pastor, lips moving silently in what might have been a prayer. 65 men, all of them looking at her, all of them in that moment seeing their own daughters, their own granddaughters, their own broken pieces reflected in a 5-year-old girl with a pink crutch and a taped-together butterfly. Emma looked back at Jack, and for the first time since Tyler Marsh had walked into Dawson's diner and torn her world apart, something shifted in those blue eyes. Not quite a smile, not yet, but the ghost of one. The first fragile flicker of light in a room that had gone dark. "You came because of me?" she asked. Jack nodded. "Every single one of us." "But you don't even know me." Jack smiled. And it was the kind of smile that cost a man something. The kind that comes from a place of deep old sadness and fights its way up to the surface anyway. "We didn't have to know you, sweetheart. We just had to know you needed us." Emma stared at him for a long moment. Then she did something that nobody in that diner expected. Something that broke every heart in the room and put it back together in the same breath. She reached out with her small hand and touched Jack's face. Her tiny fingers rested on his rough, weathered cheek, right where the rain was still drying in his silver beard. "You're crying," she said. Jack hadn't realized he was. He reached up and felt the wetness on his face. He let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped inside him for 15 years. "Yeah," he said, his voice raw. "I guess I am." Logan turned away. His shoulders shook once. Diesel pressed his fist against his mouth and stared at the ceiling. Bones pulled off his bandana and wiped his face with it. And Ruth stood behind the counter, both hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks, watching her brother kneel before a little girl who looked exactly like the daughter he'd buried. Sarah held her daughter's hand and cried silently, not from sadness this time, but from something she hadn't felt in a very long time, hope. And then from somewhere outside, the sound of a car door slamming, hard, angry, followed by a voice that everyone in town recognized. "What the hell is going on in my diner?" Gerald Marsh had arrived. Gerald Marsh pushed through the front door like he owned the place. Because he did. He owned the building, the parking lot, and according to him, half the town along with it. He was 53, broad-shouldered, wearing a cashmere overcoat that cost more than Ruth made in a month. His face was red, not from the cold, from rage. His son Tyler had called him 11 minutes ago, stammering about bikers at the diner, and Gerald had broken 3 traffic laws getting here. He stopped 2 steps inside the door. His eyes swept the room. Leather vests, tattoos, beards, chains, and his lip curled. Then his eyes found the Hells Angels patches on the backs of the men standing near the counter. And something flickered across his face. Not fear. Gerald Marsh didn't do fear. But calculation. The quick, cold math of a man deciding how to handle a situation he hadn't planned for. "Somebody want to explain why there are 60 motorcycles in my parking lot?" His voice was loud, sharp, designed to command a room. Nobody answered. The bikers didn't move, didn't flinch. They just looked at him with the kind of patient, steady silence that says more than words ever could. Jack straightened up from where he'd been kneeling beside Emma. His knees cracked. He turned slowly. And when his eyes met Gerald's, the temperature in the diner dropped 10 degrees. "You, Gerald Marsh," Jack asked. "You're damn right I am. And you're trespassing on my property. We're customers. We came in for coffee." Jack's voice was calm, conversational, like he was discussing the weather. "Your son came in for something else." Gerald's jaw tightened. "My son is 17 years old. Whatever happened here was a misunderstanding." Ruth stepped forward from behind the counter. Her hands were shaking, but her voice wasn't. "A misunderstanding." She stared at Gerald. "Your boy slapped a 5-year-old girl across the face, Gerald. He knocked her food on the floor, ripped up her drawing, and called her a cripple. That's not a misunderstanding, that's assault." "Ruth, I'd be very careful about what you say next." Gerald's voice dropped into the register he used in boardrooms, in courtrooms, low, controlled, threatening. "You work in my building. You serve coffee in my building. One phone call and this diner is closed by Monday." Ruth flinched. She couldn't help it. The threat was real. Gerald had done it before. Shut down a barbershop whose owner complained about noise from Marsh's construction crew. Evicted a family who couldn't pay rent after Gerald raised it 300% overnight. The man wielded money like a weapon, and he never missed. But before Ruth could respond, Jack spoke. "You just threatened a 65-year-old woman for telling the truth about what your son did to a child." Jack took 1 step toward Gerald. Just one. In front of 65 witnesses. Gerald held his ground, but his eyes darted to the bikers flanking the room. Diesel stood by the door, arms crossed, his body blocking the exit. Logan was by the window. Wrench and Tombstone were at the counter. Preacher stood near the jukebox. And outside, through the rain-streaked glass, 35 more men stood beside their bikes, watching. "Is that supposed to intimidate me?" Gerald said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I don't need to intimidate you," Jack said. "Your son already did that to a 5-year-old girl. I'm just here to talk." "Talk?" Gerald laughed. "Fine. Let's talk. My son is a minor. Whatever he did or didn't do, it's a juvenile matter. You want to press charges? Go ahead. My lawyers will have it dismissed before lunch." and then I'll sue every single one of you for harassment, intimidation, and trespassing. Sarah had been silent through all of this, holding Emma tight against her chest. But when Gerald said whatever he did or didn't do, something inside her snapped. He hit my daughter. Her voice cut through the diner like broken glass. Gerald turned to look at her for the first time. He saw a young woman with red eyes and messy hair, holding a small child with a leg brace. He dismissed her in half a second. Ma'am, kid's roughhouse. It happens. I'm sorry if your daughter got her feelings hurt, but he didn't hurt her feelings. Sarah's voice rose, not shouting, something worse. The cold, trembling fury of a mother who has nothing left to lose. He hit her, open hand, across the face. She's 5 years old and she has a bruise on her cheek from your son's hand. Look at her. She turned Emma slightly so the bruise was visible. The reddish-purple mark stood out against Emma's pale skin like a stain that wouldn't wash out. Look at her. Sarah's voice cracked. Gerald looked for exactly 2 seconds. Then he turned back to Jack. I'll write a check. Whatever her medical bills are, we can settle this right now. The silence that followed was volcanic. Logan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Diesel's jaw muscle twitched. Bones pushed off the counter and took a step forward before Preacher put a hand on his arm and held him back. Jack tilted his head. You want to write a check? That's how adults handle things. Your son slapped a disabled 5-year-old girl in the face and you want to write a check. I'm offering a reasonable. There isn't a check big enough. Jack's voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. You can't buy your way out of this. Not today. Not this time. Your boy did something cruel to a child who couldn't defend herself, and every single person in this room saw the result. No amount of money erases that handprint from her face. Gerald's composure cracked. Just for a second, a flash of something, not guilt, not remorse, but the rattled fury of a man who's used to controlling every room he enters, and suddenly can't. So what do you want? Gerald snapped. I want your son to walk through that door, look that little girl in the eye, and apologize. Fine, I'll have him write a letter. Not a letter. In person. Here, now. Gerald shook his head. I'm not dragging my son in here to be humiliated in front of a bunch of... He stopped himself, but the word hung in the air like smoke. A bunch of what? Diesel spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a man who'd spent 4 years in combat zones and came home with shrapnel in his hip and nightmares he still couldn't shake. Go ahead. Finish that sentence. Gerald straightened his coat. This is ridiculous. I'm calling my lawyer. He pulled out his phone. His hand was steady, practiced. He'd made this move 100 times, the power play, the legal threat, the implicit message that he was above consequence. He started dialing. Jack didn't move. He just watched. Then he said calmly, while you're at it, you might want to call a PR firm too. Gerald paused. Excuse me? See that woman in the corner? Jack nodded toward Abby, the young library worker who'd been sitting in her booth crying since the incident. She had her phone out. It was pointed at Gerald. She's been recording since you walked in. And my guess is a man who just offered to write a check to make a child abuse case disappear isn't going to look great on the evening news. Gerald's face went white. He turned to Abby. Put that phone down. Abby didn't move. Her hands were shaking, but she held the phone steady. Number. I said put it down. Now. You don't get to tell her what to do, Ruth said from behind the counter. Her voice was steady now, stronger than it had been all day. You don't get to tell any of us what to do, not anymore. Gerald looked around the diner. At Ruth, who'd served him coffee for 20 years and never once talked back. At Miguel, the cook who stood with his arms crossed and his chin up. At Walter, the old regular who had sat in silence during the assault but was now standing. Actually standing for the first time, his hands gripping the back of his chair. You all want to make an enemy of me. Gerald's voice was quieter now. Dangerous. Fine. But remember who keeps this town running. You keep this town scared. Walter said. His voice was rusty, like a door opening for the first time in years. There's a difference. The words landed like a hammer. Gerald stared at the old man. Walter stared back. 81 years old, bad hip, trembling hands. But his eyes were clear and hard as stone. I sat in that booth and watched your boy hit that child. Walter continued. And I didn't do nothing. That's on me. That's my shame. And I'll carry it to my grave. But I'll be damned if I sit here and watch you try to buy your way out of what he did. The diner was dead silent. Then Miguel spoke. I was in the kitchen. I heard her crying and I didn't come out. I was afraid of losing my job. He looked at Gerald. Because of you. Because everyone in this town is afraid of you. But that girl is 5 years old, man. 5. What kind of people are we if we can't stand up for a 5-year-old kid? Something was shifting. Something tectonic. The fear that Gerald Marsh had cultivated for decades was cracking. And through the cracks, something else was pushing up. Not anger. Courage. The slow, painful, overdue courage of people who had been silent too long. Gerald felt it. He could feel the room turning against him like a tide. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't know what to do. Call your son, Jack said again. Not a request this time. A statement. Gerald stared at him. 10 seconds. 20. The longest silence of his life. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed. Tyler, get down to the diner now. A pause. I don't care if you're scared. Get down here. He hung up and slid the phone back into his pocket. His face was a mask, but his hands were trembling. Not with rage anymore. Something else. Something he hadn't felt since he was a boy, and his own father caught him in a lie. The hot, squirming discomfort of being exposed. They waited. The rain kept falling. Nobody spoke. Emma had been watching the whole exchange from Sarah's arms, her blue eyes taking in everything with the terrifying clarity that children have. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the feelings. She understood that the man in the nice coat was the father of the boy who hit her. She understood that Jack was standing between them. She understood that something important was happening. Mama, she whispered, is that man angry at me? Sarah pressed her lips to Emma's forehead. No, baby, he's not angry at you. Then why does he look so mean? Sarah didn't have an answer. But Jack heard it. He turned slightly, just enough to catch Emma's eye, and gave her a small nod. A promise. I'm right here, you're safe. 7 minutes later, the door opened. Tyler walked in, alone. No friends this time, no swagger, no smirk. He looked like a different person from the boy who had strutted through this same door 3 hours ago and slapped a little girl. His face was blotchy. His eyes were puffy and red. He'd been crying. He stopped just inside the door and saw the bikers. All of them, surrounding every table, lining the walls, filling the room with a presence that was impossible to ignore. His breath caught. His legs locked. Tyler, Gerald said sharply, get over here. Tyler walked to his father on legs that barely held him. He kept his eyes on the floor. He couldn't look at anyone, not the bikers, not Ruth, not Sarah, and especially not the little girl in the booth by the window. Jack turned to face him. He didn't move toward Tyler, didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to make the boy shrink. You know why you're here, Jack said. Tyler nodded without looking up. Look at me. Tyler raised his eyes. They were filled with the kind of fear that strips away everything. Pride, arrogance, bravado, and leaves nothing but the raw, exposed core of a person. In that moment, Tyler Marsh wasn't a bully. He was a scared 17-year-old standing in front of a man who saw right through him. What's your name, Jack asked. Tyler, barely a whisper. Tyler, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them honestly. Can you do that? Tyler nodded. This morning you came into this diner. You saw a little girl sitting alone. She was eating pancakes and drawing butterflies. She has a leg brace and a crutch because she was born with a disability she didn't choose and can't control. What did you do to her? Tyler's chin trembled. I made fun of her. What else? I knocked her plate off the table. What else? Tyler's face crumbled. I ripped her drawing. What else, Tyler? A sob escaped from the boy's chest. Raw, ugly, the sound of something breaking that had needed to break for a long time. I hit her. I slapped her. A 5-year-old girl, Jack said. You slapped a 5-year-old girl with a disability. Yes, sir. Why? The question hung in the air. Tyler opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Because there was no answer. There was no reason. There was no justification that could turn what he did into something that made sense. I don't know, Tyler choked. I don't know why I did it. Gerald shifted uncomfortably. He started to speak, to offer some excuse, some explanation, but Jack raised a hand without even looking at him. And Gerald went silent. A man who hadn't been silenced in decades shut down by a single gesture. You don't know, Jack repeated. Let me tell you something, Tyler. I had a daughter once. Her name was Lily. She was 6 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, loved to draw, just like that little girl over there. One afternoon, she was walking home from school, and a man in a pickup truck ran a red light and killed her. Just like that. Gone. Tyler's eyes widened. The tears kept coming. I would give everything I have, every single thing, to hear my daughter's voice one more time, to see her draw one more picture, to watch her eat pancakes and get whipped cream on her nose. Jack's voice broke for the first time. He stopped, took a breath, steadied himself. And you walked into this diner and hit a little girl who has every single thing I lost. You hit her because you could, because she was small, because she was different, because nobody was going to stop you. Tyler was shaking, full body tremors, snot running down his face. His armor was gone, every layer of it. The rich kid confidence, the bully sneer, the father's protection, stripped away, leaving nothing but a boy who suddenly understood the magnitude of what he'd done. I'm sorry, Tyler gasped. I'm so sorry. Don't say it to me, Jack said. He stepped aside and pointed to the booth where Emma sat in her mother's arms, watching with those enormous blue eyes. Say it to her. Tyler looked at Emma, and something in his face collapsed completely, because from across the room he could see the bruise on her cheek, his handprint, on a 5-year-old's face, the evidence of what he was stamped in purple and red on the skin of a child. He walked toward her. Each step felt like a mile. Sarah's grip on Emma tightened. Every biker in the room tracked his movement. Logan shifted his weight, ready to move if needed. Diesel uncrossed his arms and let them hang at his sides. Tyler stopped in front of the booth. He looked at Emma. She looked back at him. No fear in her eyes now, not hate either. Just that wide, clear gaze that children have. The one that sees everything and judges nothing. Tyler dropped to his knees, not because anyone told him to. His legs simply gave out. He knelt on the sticky floor of Dawson's diner in a puddle of dried milkshake and syrup, and looked into the eyes of the little girl he had hurt. I'm sorry, he said. His voice was raw, shattered. I'm sorry I hit you. I'm sorry I broke your drawing. I'm sorry I called you that word. I'm sorry. He couldn't say anything else. The sobs took over. Emma looked at him for a long moment. The diner held its breath. 65 bikers, a waitress, a cook, an old man, a librarian, a mother, a father in a cashmere coat, all of them waiting for a 5-year-old girl to decide what happened next. Emma reached under the table and picked up her butterfly drawing, the one with the tape running through the middle. She held it out to Tyler. It's okay, she said softly. See, I fixed it. It's still a butterfly. Tyler took the drawing with shaking hands. He looked at it, the yellow wings, the crooked crayon smile, the tape line where it had been torn and put back together. And he broke. Completely. A sound came out of him that nobody in that diner had ever heard from a 17-year-old boy. The sound of a wall coming home. The sound of a heart being cracked open by a kindness it didn't deserve. "I don't deserve this," Tyler whispered. "That's the point," son Jack said quietly from behind him. "Grace isn't something you deserve. It's something you receive. And what you do with it is what defines you." Gerald Marsh stood alone by the door. He hadn't moved. His cashmere coat suddenly felt ridiculous. His lawyers, his money, his power. All of it felt like paper walls in a room full of steel and truth. He watched his son kneeling on a dirty floor, crying, holding a taped-together butterfly drawing, being forgiven by the child he had hurt. And for the first time in Gerald Marsh's adult life, he felt something he'd spent decades building walls against. Shame, real shame. The kind that money can't fix, the kind that lawyers can't argue away. The kind that starts in the gut and spreads to the chest and rises to the throat until it's hard to breathe. He thought about Tyler. Not the Tyler in this diner, but the Tyler who was 7 and used to draw pictures at the kitchen table. The Tyler who cried when his goldfish died. The Tyler who asked Daddy, "Will you play with me?" and was told, "Not now, I'm busy." Every time, every single time, Gerald Marsh hadn't raised a bully. He'd built one, brick by brick, absence by absence, check by check. Every time he replaced his presence with money. Every time he taught Tyler that power mattered more than people. Every time he showed his son that the world was something to be owned rather than lived in. He laid another brick in the wall that turned a sweet boy into someone who could slap a 5-year-old girl and laugh about it. His knees felt weak. He put a hand on the nearest table to steady himself. Tyler was still on the floor, still holding the butterfly drawing. When he looked up at Emma one more time, "Can I ask you something?" Emma nodded. "What's your name?" "Emma." Tyler's voice cracked. "I'll never forget your name. I promise. And I'll never forget what you just did." Emma tilted her head. "What did I do?" "You forgave me, even though I didn't deserve it." Tyler wiped his face with the back of his hand. Nobody's ever done that before. Something in those words made Sarah cry. Not for herself, for Tyler. Because she heard the truth in it. A 17-year-old boy who had never been truly forgiven for anything. Because he'd never been held accountable for anything. His father's money had always made the consequences disappear before they could teach him anything. And now on his knees in a diner, a 5-year-old girl had done what Gerald Marsh's money never could. She'd made his son feel something real. Jack watched it all. He let the moment breathe. Then he turned to Gerald, who was still gripping the table by the door, his face gray, his eyes wet. "Mr. Marsh," Jack said, "not angry now, something deeper than anger. Your son isn't a bad kid. He did a bad thing. There's a difference. But that difference only matters if somebody teaches him. And from what I've seen today, he hasn't had much teaching." Gerald opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. First, he couldn't find the words. For a man who'd built an empire on words, contracts, negotiations, threats, promises, he suddenly had none. "Your son is on his knees in front of a little girl asking for forgiveness," Jack continued. "Maybe you should be asking yourself why he turned out the way he did. And maybe, just maybe, you should start fixing that before you try to fix anything else." Gerald looked at Tyler, still on the floor, still holding the drawing. The boy looked up at his father. And in that look was everything that had gone unspoken between them for 17 years. The loneliness, the neglect, the desperate need for a father who showed up not with a checkbook, but with his time, his attention, his love. "Dad," Tyler said. Just that, just the word. But the way he said it carried the weight of every empty chair at every school play, every unanswered call, every birthday dinner where Gerald was closing a deal instead of blowing out candles with his son. Gerald Marsh did something he hadn't done in front of another person since his own mother died. He cried. Standing in the doorway of Dawson's Diner in his expensive coat, surrounded by 65 bikers and a room full of people he'd spent years intimidating, Gerald Marsh put his hand over his face and wept. Tyler got up from the floor. He walked to his father, and Gerald did something he should have done 10,000 times before. He pulled his son into his arms and held him. "I'm sorry," Gerald whispered into Tyler's hair. "I'm sorry, son." They stood there, father and son, clinging to each other in a way they hadn't since Tyler was small enough to carry. The room watched. Nobody interrupted. Some things are too sacred to rush. Logan wiped his eyes with the heel of his palm. Bones turned away and stared out the window at the rain. Ruth pressed both hands flat on the counter and bowed her head. And Jack stood in the center of it all, his hands at his sides, watching a family break apart and come back together in the same breath. Emma tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "Mama, why is everybody crying?" Sarah laughed through her tears. "Because sometimes baby crying is how people start to get better." Emma thought about this for a moment. Then she looked at her taped butterfly drawing and said very seriously, "Like my butterfly." Sarah kissed the top of her daughter's head and held her so tight the whole world could have fallen away and she wouldn't have noticed. "Yeah, baby, exactly like your butterfly." Gerald eventually pulled back from Tyler. He wiped his face with his hand, not bothering to hide it. He looked at Jack, not with hostility, not with fear, with something that might have been the first honest expression Gerald Marsh had worn in 20 years. "I owe you an apology," Gerald said. His voice was hoarse. "I owe everyone in this room an apology, and I owe that little girl more than I know how to give." Jack nodded once. "Then start giving it, not with money, with action, with change. Your son needs a father, not a checkbook. And this town needs a man who builds people up instead of tearing them down." Gerald looked at Emma one more time. Small, blonde, brave, holding her butterfly. Then he looked at his son, who was watching him with an expression that was equal parts hope and disbelief. The look of a boy who had stopped expecting anything good from his father a long time ago and was terrified to start again. "I'll do better," Gerald said. To Jack, to Tyler, to the room. "I don't know how yet, but I'll do better." Jack extended his hand. Gerald looked at it, the tattooed knuckles, the calluses, the silver ring on the index finger, and took it. They shook once, firm, a handshake between two men who would never be friends, but had just found the thinnest, most fragile thread of mutual respect. Outside, the rain was stopping. A crack of light split the gray sky. And in Dawson's Diner, a 5-year-old girl with a taped-together butterfly had just done what money, power, lawyers, and fear never could. She'd made an entire room remember what it meant to be human. But the story wasn't over yet. 2 days later, Sarah Mitchell received a certified letter from the law firm of Hutchins, Bradshaw and Associates, representing Gerald Marsh. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a lawsuit against Jack Morrison and the Davidson County chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. Charges: criminal trespass, intimidation, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Damages sought $500,000. Sarah's stomach dropped. She called Ruth. Ruth called Jack. Jack sat in his garage and read the lawsuit 3 times. Then he set it down on his workbench. Diesel was standing in the doorway. "They're coming after us," Diesel said. "I see that." Gerald's board must have pushed him, protecting the company image. Probably. "What are we going to do?" Jack looked at the photograph of Lily on his workbench. 6 years old, pigtails, gap-toothed smile. "We're going to keep our promise," Jack said. "We came for Emma, and we'd do it again." This could shut down the chapter. "I know. You could go to jail." "I know." Diesel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know, we're all with you, every single one of us." Jack nodded. "I know." The news broke the next day. Local businessman Gerald Marsh files lawsuit against motorcycle club for harassment and intimidation. The story was picked up by 3 local news stations, then the Nashville Tennessean, then a regional cable network. And then Abby Reynolds did something that changed everything. She posted the video. The full, unedited video of Gerald Marsh walking into Dawson's diner, threatening Ruth, offering to write a check to make the assault of a 5-year-old girl go away. She posted it to YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. Within 6 hours, it had 100,000 views. Within 12 hours, 1,000,000. Within 24 hours, 5 million. The comments poured in. This man tried to buy his way out of his son assaulting a disabled child. Where are the charges against the boy who hit a 5-year-old? Those bikers are heroes. The phone at Gerald Marsh's office started ringing. Clients canceling contracts. Investors pulling out. Board members demanding an emergency meeting. And then the Today Show called. They wanted to interview Jack Morrison. And Emma? Jack said no. She's 5 years old, he told the producer. She's been through enough. But the damage to Gerald Marsh was done. By the end of the week, his company's stock had dropped 18%. 3 board members resigned, and the lawsuit was quietly withdrawn. Gerald's lawyer called Jack personally. My client wishes to settle this matter privately. There's nothing to settle, Jack said. We didn't do anything wrong. Mr. Marsh would like to speak with you in person. They met at Dawson's diner at noon on a Thursday, just the 2 of them. Gerald looked like he'd aged 10 years in 1 week. The video destroyed me, Gerald said. The board gave me an ultimatum. Step down or they force me out. Jack said nothing. I deserved it, Gerald continued. All of it. The truth is I've been a terrible father, a terrible man, and I've been hiding behind money my whole life. He paused. Tyler and I have been going to therapy 3 times a week. We're also volunteering at the Children's Rehab Center downtown. Together. That's a start, Jack said. I want to help, Emma, Gerald said. Not with money, not to make this go away, but because she deserves help. And because watching what she did for my son, it changed me. Jack studied his face. What kind of help? I sit on the board at Morrison Medical, the prosthetics company. I can make sure her case gets priority. Make sure she gets the best care. No strings, no publicity, just help. Jack was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'll talk to her mother. Gerald nodded. Thank you. He stood to leave, then stopped. That little girl saved my son's life. You know that, right? If she hadn't forgiven him, if you all hadn't shown up, Tyler would have kept going down that path until it destroyed him. Jack looked up. She saved more than your son. Gerald's eyes filled. I know. He left. And Jack sat alone in the booth, thinking about Lily, about Emma, about the strange, winding path that Grace takes through a broken world. 2 weeks later, Sarah Mitchell stood in the waiting room of Dr. Marcus Peterson's clinic, holding Emma's hand, waiting for the moment that would change everything. Dr. Marcus Peterson walked into the waiting room at exactly 10 in the morning. He was tall, thin, gray hair, glasses that sat low on his nose. The kind of face that immediately made children feel safe. Behind him was a woman carrying a case. She set it on the counter. Emma's eyes went wide. You must be Emma, Dr. Peterson said, pulling up a chair and sitting so he was at her eye level. I've heard a lot about you. From Uncle Jack, Emma asked. Dr. Peterson's eyebrows went up. Uncle Jack, Sarah smiled. She's adopted the entire Hells Angels chapter. Jack Morrison is Uncle Jack now. Logan is Uncle Logan. She calls Diesel Uncle D because she can't say his name right. Dr. Peterson laughed. Well, Uncle Jack talks about you like you're the toughest person he's ever met. And I've known that man for 20 years, so that's saying something. Emma straightened up a little. I am tough. I can see that. Peterson rolled his chair closer. Emma, do you know why you're here today? I'm getting a new leg. That's right. and I'm going to take some measurements and make sure everything fits perfectly. It's going to feel strange at first, maybe a little uncomfortable, but I promise you we're going to take our time and get it exactly right. Sound good? Emma nodded. Then she looked at the case on the counter. Is that it? Is my new leg in there? Peterson glanced at his assistant. She opened the case. Inside, nestled in foam padding, was a custom pediatric prosthetic. It was smaller than an adult's, designed specifically for a 5-year-old's frame, with a soft socket, a flexible joint, and a lightweight carbon fiber shaft. But that wasn't what made Emma gasp. The prosthetic was painted, not medical beige, not clinical white, butterflies. Dozens of tiny hand-painted butterflies in every color: yellow, blue, purple, orange, cascading down the leg like a garden taking flight. And on the side, engraved in silver script, 3 words: "You are strong." Emma stared at it, her mouth open, her eyes enormous. Uncle Jack had it custom painted, Peterson said softly. He said you'd know what the butterflies mean. Emma couldn't speak. She reached out and touched the butterflies with one finger, tracing their wings, her hand trembling. Then she looked at Sarah, and her face crumpled, not with sadness, but with the overwhelming body-shaking force of a child experiencing something so good she doesn't have the emotional vocabulary to process it. "Mama," she whispered, "it has butterflies." Sarah was already crying. She pulled Emma into her arms and held her, rocking her, pressing her face into those blonde curls, unable to say anything, because there were no words big enough for this moment. The fitting took 2 hours. Peterson was meticulous, adjusting, readjusting, checking pressure points, making sure the socket was snug but not painful, testing the range of motion, asking Emma every 30 seconds if she was comfortable. Emma sat patiently through all of it, her eyes never leaving the butterflies on her new leg. When it was done, Peterson stepped back. "Okay, Emma, ready to try standing up?" Emma looked at her mother. Sarah nodded, wiping her face. Emma slid off the table. Her left foot touched the ground first, familiar, steady. Then her right foot, the new foot, the prosthetic foot. It touched the ground and held. Emma wobbled. Sarah reached out instinctively. But Peterson raised a hand. "Let her try," he said. Emma stood, both feet on the ground. No crutch, no hand on the wall. Just a 5-year-old girl standing on her own 2 feet, one of bone and one of carbon fiber and butterflies for the first time in her life. She looked down at her legs, both of them, standing, holding her up. "Mama," her voice was barely a breath. "Mama, I'm standing. I see you, baby. I see you. I'm standing by myself." "I know, sweetheart." Emma took a step. Her right leg moved forward, the prosthetic joint bending exactly the way Peterson had designed it to, smooth and natural. She wobbled again, caught herself, and took another step. Then another, then another. She was walking, not perfectly, not smoothly. Her gait was uneven, her balance uncertain, her arms out wide for stability. But she was walking across the examination room floor, one step at a time, moving forward on her own power for the first time in 5 years. Sarah collapsed into a chair. She couldn't stand anymore. Her legs wouldn't hold her. She sat there with both hands pressed over her mouth and watched her daughter walk. And every step Emma took broke something open inside Sarah's chest and rebuilt it stronger. Emma reached the far wall. She turned around, slowly, carefully, one hand on the wall for balance, and looked at her mother across the room. "Mama, watch." She let go of the wall. She stood on her own, and then she walked back. 7 steps, 8 steps, 9 steps, all the way to Sarah's chair. She stopped in front of her mother and looked up with a face that was glowing. "I did it," she said. "I walked." Sarah pulled her daughter onto her lap and held her so tight she could feel both their heartbeats pounding together. You did it, baby. You did it. Peterson's assistant was crying. Peterson himself had taken off his glasses and was polishing them with his lab coat, which is what he always did when he didn't want anyone to see his eyes. She's a natural, Peterson said, his voice not quite steady. With physical therapy and practice, she'll be running within 6 months. Running, Sarah whispered. Running and climbing and jumping and doing everything she's ever wanted to do. Emma looked up from Sarah's lap. Can I ride a motorcycle? Peterson laughed. Let's start with walking, sweetheart. But Emma was already imagining it. Sitting behind Uncle Jack on his big motorcycle with the loud engine, the wind in her hair, the butterflies on her leg catching the sunlight. Flying. They left the clinic at noon. Sarah carried Emma's old crutch in one hand. Emma walked beside her, holding Sarah's other hand, each step deliberate and determined. She was slow. She wobbled. Twice she had to stop and steady herself against Sarah's leg. But she didn't ask to be carried. She didn't ask for the crutch. She walked. On the bus home, Emma fell asleep against Sarah's shoulder, exhausted from the effort. Sarah held her and stared out the window and thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. A Saturday morning, pancakes, a cruel boy, a slap, a butterfly torn in half, a phone call, 65 motorcycles, a man named Jack who lost his daughter and spent the rest of his life trying to save everyone else's. She thought about how close she'd come to never going to that diner at all. How she'd almost stayed home because the bus fare was $2 she couldn't really spare. How one tiny decision to give her daughter pancakes on a Saturday had set in motion a chain of events that changed everything. She pressed her lips to Emma's forehead. We're going to be okay, she whispered. We're going to be okay. But the next 2 weeks were harder than Sarah expected. Learning to walk with a prosthetic wasn't like flipping a switch. It was work. Hard, painful, frustrating work. Emma fell. A lot. Sometimes she'd take 3 good steps and then her balance would shift and she'd go down hard on her hands and knees. Other times the prosthetic would rub a pressure point wrong and Emma would cry because it hurt. And sometimes late at night when Sarah thought Emma was asleep, she'd hear her daughter crying in her room. Soft, hiccuping sobs that broke Sarah's heart. On day 11, Emma threw the prosthetic across the room. I can't do it. Mama, she screamed, it's too hard, it hurts. Sarah picked up the prosthetic. The butterflies stared back at her, beautiful and mocking. Baby, I know it's hard. You don't know. Emma sobbed. You can walk fine, your legs work right. Mine doesn't. It'll never work right. Sarah knelt in front of her daughter. Emma Grace Mitchell, you listen to me. This leg works perfectly. It's your leg, and it's strong, just like you. I'm not strong. I keep falling. Strong people fall all the time, baby. That's not what makes them strong. What makes them strong is that they get back up. Emma shook her head. I don't want to get back up. I want to stay down. And Sarah didn't know what to say to that, because part of her understood. Part of her wanted to stay down too. She called Jack. He came the next morning, pulled up to their apartment building on his motorcycle at 8 in the morning. The engine rumbling so loud Mrs. Hernandez next door came out to complain. But when she saw Big Jack Morrison standing on the sidewalk holding a bag from the bakery, she went back in without a word. Jack knocked on Sarah's door. Emma answered. She was still in her pajamas, her prosthetic sitting in the corner of the living room like a piece of furniture she'd given up on. Uncle Jack, Emma threw herself at him. Jack caught her, lifted her up, held her like she weighed nothing. Hey, Butterfly, what are you doing here? I brought donuts. The kind with sprinkles. Is there any other kind? Emma giggled. Jack carried her to the couch and set her down. He sat beside her, opened the bag, pulled out a donut with pink frosting and rainbow sprinkles. Emma took it with both hands. Sarah came out of the kitchen. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. Jack nodded. Then he looked at the prosthetic in the corner. You having trouble with your leg, Butterfly? Emma's face fell. I keep falling. How many times you fall today? 3. Three's not bad. It is bad. I'm supposed to be walking good by now. Jack took a bite of his own donut, chewed slowly. Then he said, "Can I tell you a story?" Emma nodded. When my daughter Lily was 5 years old, I decided to teach her how to ride a bike. Emma's eyes went wide. Did she fall? Oh, she fell all right. First time I let go, she went about 2 feet and then went straight into a rose bush. Emma gasped. Did she cry? Like you wouldn't believe. Got scratched up, got mad, told me she hated bikes and she was never riding one again. What did you do? Jack smiled, a sad smile. The kind that holds a memory so precious it hurts to touch it. I told her the same thing I'm going to tell you. Falling doesn't mean you're bad at something. It means you're learning. Emma thought about this. How many times did Lily fall before she could ride? Jack's throat tightened. I don't know, 100 maybe, but she got up 101 times. And on that 101st time, she rode all the way down the street without my help. And when she came back, she was laughing so hard she almost fell off again. Emma looked at her prosthetic, then back at Jack. I'm scared I'll never get it. Jack set down his donut. He turned to face Emma fully. You know what scares me? Emma shook her head. I'm scared that you'll give up. Because if you give up, then Tyler Marsh wins. And I don't think either of us wants that. Emma's jaw set. I don't want him to win. Then don't let him. Get back up. Try again. Fall 100 times if you have to, but don't quit. Emma stared at him for a long moment. Then she slid off the couch, walked to the corner, picked up her prosthetic, and put it on. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Emma stood up, wobbled, caught herself, took a step, then another, then another. She made it all the way to Jack without falling. And when she got there, she looked up at him with those blue eyes and said, I'm not quitting. Jack pulled her into a hug. And over her shoulder, he mouthed to Sarah, she's gonna be okay. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know. 2 more weeks passed. Emma practiced every day. She fell less, walked more, and slowly, painfully, wonderfully, she got stronger. On day 26, she walked from the front door of the apartment to the mailbox at the end of the block. Without stopping, without falling. Sarah followed behind her the whole way, heart in her throat, hands ready to catch her. But Emma didn't need catching. She made it to the mailbox, touched it, turned around, and walked back. And when she got to Sarah, she was grinning. I did it, Mama. You did it, babe. Can I call Uncle Jack? Absolutely. Emma called Jack from Sarah's phone. He answered on the first ring. Hey, Butterfly. Uncle Jack. I walked to the mailbox. What? All by yourself? All by myself? Jack's voice got thick. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Will you come see me walk? I'll do you one better. How about you come to the diner? We're having a family breakfast this Saturday. All your uncles are going to be there. Emma squealed so loud Sarah had to pull the phone away from her ear. Saturday morning arrived. Sarah dressed Emma in her blue dress, the one with the daisies. Emma put on her prosthetic without being asked. And they took the bus to Dawson's Diner. When they arrived, the parking lot was full. 65 motorcycles, lined up in perfect rows, gleaming in the morning sun. Emma's eyes went huge. Mama, they're all here. They're all here for you, baby. Ruth had been cooking since 4 in the morning. Miguel had called in 2 extra cooks. They'd pushed every table in the diner together to make one long row. And the bikers sat shoulder to shoulder, filling the room with laughter and noise and the smell of leather. Sarah and Emma stood outside the door. You ready? Sarah asked. Emma nodded and pushed through the door. The bell jingled, and the diner went quiet. 65 men turned to look at her. Emma stood in the doorway, blue dress, blonde curls, butterfly leg, standing on her own 2 feet. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Logan stood up, then Diesel, then Bones, Tombstone, Wrench, Preacher, Hawk, and every other man in the room, one by one, until all 65 Hells Angels were on their feet, and they started clapping. Not polite clapping. The thunderous from the chest, shaking the walls kind of clapping that sounds like a standing ovation and a battle cry at the same time. They clapped and they cheered, and some of them whistled, and some of them wiped their eyes, and none of them tried to hide it. Emma's face broke into the biggest smile Sarah had ever seen. She let go of her mother's hand and walked down the length of the diner toward the table. Each step was met with louder cheering. By the time she reached Jack at the head of the table, the noise was deafening. Jack crouched down. His eyes were wet, but he was grinning. "Look at you," he said. "Look at you, butterfly." Emma threw her arms around his neck. Jack caught her and lifted her. And for just a moment, if you looked at his face, you could see it. The ghost of another little girl. Blonde hair, blue eyes, who used to run to him just like this and throw her arms around his neck and say, "Daddy, I love you." "Uncle Jack," Emma said, pulling back to look at him. "I walked all by myself. I saw that. You were incredible. I only wobbled twice." "Twice is nothing. I wobble all the time and I've been walking for 60 years. Emma giggled. Then she looked at the butterflies on her prosthetic leg and back at Jack. "Thank you for my butterflies." Jack's throat closed. He swallowed hard. "You're welcome, sweetheart." "Uncle Jack." "Yeah." Emma's voice got very small, very serious. "I'm not broken anymore." The room went silent. Every man heard it. Every man felt it. The words landed like a stone in still water, and the ripples went out in every direction. Touching Logan, who thought of his daughter at home. Touching Diesel, who remembered his mother saying the same words after his father left. Touching Bones, who was 72 and still learning that scars don't define a man. Touching Tombstone, who would call his daughter Sophia that night and tell her he loved her. Touching Preacher, who closed his eyes and whispered amen. Jack looked at Emma. He cupped her small face in his rough, tattooed hands and said the words he wished he could have said to his own daughter one more time. "Sweetheart, you never were." The breakfast lasted 3 hours. Emma sat between Jack and Logan, eating pancakes and drawing butterflies on napkins for every biker who wanted one. By the end of the morning, 65 napkin butterflies were tucked into 65 leather vests, carried close to 65 hearts that would never forget this day. Ruth watched from behind the counter, a cup of coffee growing cold in her hand. She'd put up a sign that morning, hand-painted on a piece of wood she'd found in the storeroom. "In this diner, we protect each other." It hung above the register where everyone could see it. Tyler Marsh came in at 10, alone. He walked through the door hesitantly, not sure if he was welcome. The room went tense for a moment. Then Emma saw him. "Tyler," she waved. Every biker in the room watched as Tyler walked to the table. He stopped in front of Emma and looked at her new leg. The butterflies. The silver engraving. He stared at it for a long time. "That's really cool," he said quietly. "Thanks," Emma said. "Want to see me walk?" Tyler nodded. Emma slid off her chair and walked 5 steps away and 5 steps back. Steady, strong. Tyler watched with something breaking and healing behind his eyes at the same time. "I've been volunteering at the Children's Rehab Center," Tyler said. "Not to anyone in particular, but to the room. 3 days a week. My dad comes with me now." He paused. He canceled his Thursday golf game. He's never canceled golf for anything. Jack looked at Tyler for a long time. Then he pulled out the chair beside him. "Sit down, son. Have some pancakes." Tyler sat, and for the first time since that terrible Saturday morning, he ate a meal in Dawson's Diner without shame. The months that followed changed everything. Sarah quit her second job. The GoFundMe that the Hells Angels set up raised over $200,000 in 3 weeks. Sarah used it for Emma's ongoing physical therapy, medical bills, and a reliable car so they'd never have to take the bus in the rain again. Emma's physical therapy went better than anyone expected. Within 4 months, she was walking without any assistance. Within 6 months, she was running. Not fast, not far, but running. The first time she ran across Ruth's diner to hug Jack, He picked her up, spun her around, and laughed in a way that Ruth said she hadn't heard since before Lily died. The school district launched an anti-bullying program. They called it Emma's Butterflies. Every classroom in the county had a butterfly poster on the wall with the words, "Different is not less." Tyler Marsh spoke at the launch assembly. He stood in front of 300 students and told them what he'd done to a 5-year-old girl in a diner. He didn't make excuses. He didn't minimize it. He told the truth. And then he said, "That little girl forgave me when I didn't deserve it. The least I can do is spend the rest of my life earning it." Gerald Marsh donated the building that housed Dawson's Diner to Ruth outright. No rent, no strings. He signed the deed on a Tuesday morning, shook Ruth's hand, and said, "I should have done this years ago." Then he went home and took Tyler fishing. It was the first time they'd spent a whole day together since Tyler was 9. Abby, the young librarian who had recorded Gerald's confrontation on her phone, never posted the original version again. She deleted it the day Gerald signed the deed. When people asked her why, she said, "Because the story had a better ending than the video." Walter, the old man who had sat frozen during the assault, became the diner's unofficial greeter. He came in every morning at 7, sat in his usual booth, and when families with children walked in, he'd stand up, bad hip and all, and hold the door open for them. It wasn't much, but it was his way of saying, "I'll never sit still again." Miguel put a butterfly sticker on the kitchen door. Every cook who worked at Dawson's after him kept it there. It became tradition. 1 year to the day after that terrible Saturday morning, the Hells Angels held their annual charity ride. 200 motorcycles this time, the biggest in the chapter's history. Riders came from 3 states away, all of them having heard Emma's story. They gathered in the parking lot of Dawson's Diner at dawn, engines rumbling, breath fogging in the cold November air. Emma stood at the front, 6 years old now, blue dress, blonde curls, butterfly leg, standing tall on her own 2 feet. In one hand, she held a drawing, a butterfly with big yellow wings. No tape this time, whole and perfect. In the other hand, she held Jack's. "Ready, butterfly?" Jack asked. Emma looked up at him. "Ready." Jack lifted her onto his motorcycle. A special child seat had been mounted behind him, secure and padded, with a small helmet that Logan had painted with butterflies. Emma put on the helmet and wrapped her arms around Jack's waist as far as they would go. "Hold tight," Jack said. "I always do." Jack kicked the engine to life. Behind him, 199 motorcycles followed. The sound was enormous, a rolling building roar that shook the windows of every building on Main Street. People came out of their houses and shops and stood on the sidewalks, holding butterfly signs and cheering. Sarah stood in front of the diner with Ruth, both of them crying, both of them smiling. Tyler stood nearby, clapping. Gerald stood beside his son, one hand on Tyler's shoulder. Walter was there, and Miguel, and Abby, and Preacher, and Bones, and every person whose life had been changed by what happened in this diner 1 year ago. The motorcycles rolled out, 200 strong, a river of chrome and leather and thunder, led by a 61-year-old man carrying a 6-year-old girl through the streets of a town that had finally learned what it meant to stand up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves. Emma looked over Jack's shoulder at the convoy behind them. 200 motorcycles stretching as far as she could see, all of them riding for her, all of them proving that the world, for all its cruelty, still had more kindness in it than hate. She pressed her face against Jack's leather vest and smiled. She could feel his heartbeat through the leather, steady, strong, like the man himself. "Uncle Jack," she said, her voice muffled by the wind. "Yeah, butterfly, I can fly now." Jack's grip on the handlebars tightened. His eyes burned. The road ahead blurred for just a moment, and then it cleared, and the morning sun hit the highway like a promise, turning the asphalt to gold. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick and raw and full of everything he'd lost and everything he'd found. "You can." They rode on. 200 motorcycles and one little girl with butterfly wings, heading into the light. And somewhere in a place beyond words and pain and time, a 6-year-old girl with blonde hair and pigtails and a gap-toothed smile watched her father carry another little girl into the sun and smiled. Because broken things can fly. And sometimes the bravest angels wear leather. And sometimes the toughest person in the room is 5 years old with a butterfly on her leg, proving to the whole world that love is louder than hate. That kindness is stronger than cruelty. And that 200 motorcycles roaring through the rain can change everything. The convoy moved through the town like a procession of hope. Every street corner held people who had heard the story. Some held signs with butterflies painted on them. Others simply stood and watched hands over their hearts as the bikes passed. Emma waved at them, her small hand rising above Jack's shoulder, and they waved back. Children jumped up and down, adults wiped their eyes. One elderly woman standing outside a grocery store bowed her head as if in prayer as the motorcycles rumbled past. The route took them through the heart of Nashville, past the hospital where Sarah had worked those endless night shifts, past the elementary school where Emma would start kindergarten in the fall, past Greenwood Cemetery where Jack slowed just slightly as they passed the iron gates. Lily's grave was a quarter-mile inside those gates. Jack didn't turn his head, but Emma felt something shift in how he sat, a subtle tightening of his shoulders, a deeper breath. She squeezed him tighter. "I got you, Uncle Jack," she whispered. And Jack Morrison, who had spent 15 years trying to hold himself together, who had built walls so high around his grief that even his closest brothers couldn't always reach him, felt something break open in his chest. Not pain this time, release. The convoy continued, through downtown, past the courthouse where Gerald Marsh had once wielded his influence like a weapon, past the offices of Hutchins Bradshaw and Associates where lawyers who had drafted that lawsuit now watched from their windows as 200 motorcycles declared in the loudest possible terms that some things cannot be bought or intimidated into silence. They rode to Shelby Park, a sprawling green space on the east side of the city. The Hells Angels had permits for the day. A stage had been set up, tables with food, a bouncy castle for kids, face painting, balloon artists. It was the annual charity ride celebration, but this year was different. This year they had Emma. Jack pulled his bike to the front of the line and killed the engine. The silence that followed the roar was almost startling. 200 motorcycles going quiet in sequence like a wave rolling backward. He helped Emma off the bike. She stood on wobbly legs. 6 hours was a long time for a 6-year-old, even one as tough as her. But when her feet hit the ground, she looked around at the sea of leather and chrome and faces, and her smile returned. "All of them," she said, "all of them came for me." Every single one, Jack confirmed. And then the bikers started getting off their bikes, one by one, row by row, until 200 men and women stood in that parking lot, and without anyone calling for it, without any signal being given, they started applauding again. For the second time in a year, Emma received a standing ovation from the toughest group of people most civilians would ever meet. Ruth appeared from somewhere in the crowd. She'd driven separately. She walked straight to Emma and knelt down. "How was the ride, sweetheart?" "It was so loud," Mama Ruth Emma said. She'd started calling Ruth that a few months ago. "And the wind was so fast, and Uncle Jack's motorcycle smells like adventure." Ruth laughed. "That's exactly what it smells like." Sarah pushed through the crowd. She'd ridden with Logan, who had a sidecar attached to his bike, specifically for occasions like this. She reached Emma and pulled her into a hug so tight it lifted the girl off her feet. "I watched you the whole way," Sarah said. "You looked so brave up there." "I was a little scared at first," Emma admitted. "But Uncle Jack told me that brave people get scared too. They just don't let it stop them." Sarah looked over Emma's head at Jack, mouthed the words, "Thank you." Jack nodded once, Then he turned to the gathered crowd of bikers, supporters, families, and press who had shown up. He raised his hand. The crowd quieted. 15 years ago, Jack began. His voice carried across the park without a microphone, rough and deep and commanding. I lost my daughter Lily to a drunk driver. She was 6 years old. For a long time after that, I didn't know how to keep living. I rode because it was the only thing that made sense. The road didn't ask questions. The engine didn't judge. And my brothers, he gestured to the bikers around him. They held me up when I couldn't stand. He paused. About a year ago, my sister called me. She told me a little girl had been hurt. And something inside me, something I thought had died with Lily, woke back up. It said, go, protect her, stand between her and the world that wants to break her. He looked down at Emma, who was standing beside him, now holding his hand. This little girl, Emma Grace Mitchell, taught me something I'd forgotten. She taught me that being broken doesn't mean being defeated. She taught me that forgiveness is stronger than revenge. And she taught me that sometimes the strongest people are the smallest ones. The crowd was silent, listening. Today we ride for every kid who's been told they're not enough. Every kid who's been bullied, abused, neglected, or forgotten. Every kid who wakes up scared and goes to bed alone. We ride because we remember what it's like to hurt. And we've decided that our pain won't go to waste. We're going to use it to protect the ones who can't protect themselves. The applause that followed was different from before, deeper, more reverent. Tyler Marsh was standing at the back of the crowd. He'd come with his father. Gerald had initially hesitated, unsure if they'd be welcome, but Ruth had personally called and invited them. Tyler watched Emma standing next to Jack, watched the way she smiled at the crowd, watched the butterflies on her prosthetic leg catch the afternoon light. He thought about the boy he'd been a year ago, angry, empty, cruel, and he thought about the boy he was now, still broken in some ways, still healing, but trying every single day, trying to be better. His father stood beside him. Gerald's hair had more gray in it than a year ago. The stress of nearly losing everything had aged him, but his eyes were clearer, more present. She saved us, Tyler said quietly. Gerald put his hand on his son's shoulder. I know. The celebration continued for hours. Emma actually ran between the tables, played with other children, got her face painted with a butterfly on her cheek, ate cotton candy until her tongue turned blue. Logan watched her race past him and shook his head in wonder. 6 months ago, she could barely walk, he said to Diesel. Diesel nodded. That's what happens when you give a kid something to fight for. At one point, Emma found herself surrounded by a group of younger children. They stared at her prosthetic leg with open curiosity. Why is your leg painted? One little boy asked. Emma looked down at the butterflies. Because butterflies can fly, she said simply, and so can I. Does it hurt a little girl? Asked. Emma considered this. Sometimes, she admitted, when I fall down. But my Uncle Jack says strong people fall down all the time. They just get back up, so I get back up. Emma nodded. One by one, the children reached out and gently touched the painted butterflies. Their faces filled with wonder. It's beautiful, one girl whispered. Thank you, Emma said. My Uncle Jack had it made special because he loves me. As the sun began to set, Jack found Emma sitting on a bench watching the other children play. She looked tired, happy, but tired. He sat down beside her. You ready to head home, Butterfly? Emma nodded, then she looked up at him. Uncle Jack, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think your daughter Lily would have liked me? Jack's breath caught. He looked at this little girl beside him. Blonde curls messy from the day, blue dress stained with grass and cotton candy, butterfly leg glinting in the fading light, and he saw, as he always did, the ghost of his own daughter. But this time the pain that usually accompanied that vision was different. Softer, like a wound that had finally started to heal. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice rough, "Lily would have loved you. You two would have been best friends." Emma smiled. "I wish I could have met her." Jack pulled her close. "Me too, Butterfly. Me too." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Emma said, "Uncle Jack, when I grow up, I want to help kids like me. Kids who are scared and hurt and think they're broken." Jack's throat tightened. "You already are helping them, sweetheart, just by being you." "No," Emma said seriously. "I mean really help them, like you do. I want to ride a motorcycle and have a loud engine and show up when kids need me." Jack laughed. A real laugh. The kind that came from somewhere deep and genuine. "Well," he said, "you've got about 12 years before you can get your motorcycle license. But I'll tell you what, when that day comes, I'll teach you to ride myself. Promise, promise." Emma held out her pinky finger. Jack wrapped his much larger pinky around hers. They shook on it. The ride back to town was quieter. The 200 bikers dispersed in groups, heading to their respective homes across 3 states. But the core Davidson County chapter, the original 65 who had shown up at Dawson's Diner a year ago, rode together. They escorted Jack and Emma back to Sarah's apartment building. When they arrived, the street was lined with motorcycles. Neighbors came out onto their porches. Some looked annoyed at the noise, but most just stared in awe. Jack helped Emma off the bike one final time. Sarah was waiting on the steps. "Thank you," she said to Jack, "for everything, for showing up, for believing in her, for—" She paused, her voice breaking, "for giving her a reason to believe in herself." Jack shook his head. "I didn't give her anything she didn't already have. I just reminded her." He knelt down to Emma's level one more time. "You keep being brave, okay, Butterfly?" Emma hugged him. "Okay, Uncle Jack, I love you." Jack closed his eyes, held her tight. "I love you too, sweetheart." When he finally let go and stood up, every single one of his brothers was watching. Many of them had tears in their eyes. None of them were ashamed. Diesel stepped forward and put his hand on Jack's shoulder. "You good, brother?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, I'm good." They mounted their bikes. 65 engines roared to life one final time. And as they pulled away from the curb, Emma stood on the sidewalk and waved until the last motorcycle disappeared around the corner. Then Sarah scooped her up and carried her inside. "Bedtime," she said. Emma didn't protest. She was exhausted. Sarah helped her change into her pajamas and brush her teeth. When it came time to remove the prosthetic for the night, Emma ran her fingers over the painted butterflies one more time. "They're magic," she said sleepily. Sarah kissed her forehead. "You're the magic baby." She tucked Emma into bed. The little girl's eyes were already closing. Mama Emma murmured, "Yeah, baby, I had the best day." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Within minutes, Emma was asleep. Sarah stood in the doorway and watched her daughter breathe. This child who had been through so much, who had been hurt and humiliated and told she was broken, who had every reason to hate the world. And yet she had chosen kindness. She had chosen forgiveness. She had chosen to fly. Sarah walked to the living room and sat down on the couch. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photos from the day. 200 motorcycles. Emma's face lit up with joy. Jack's smile as he held her. She thought about where they'd been a year ago, sitting in that diner, Emma crying with a handprint on her face, Sarah feeling utterly alone and helpless. And she thought about where they were now. Emma could walk, run, play. They had a car, savings, a future that looked brighter than it had in 5 years. But more than that, they had community. They had people who cared, who showed up, who proved that the world, despite everything, still had good in it. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Ruth. "That girl of yours is something special." Sarah smiled and typed back. "She learned it from the best." Ruth's response came quickly. "No, she was born with it. We just helped her remember." Sarah set the phone down, leaned her head back against the couch. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt something unfamiliar. Peace. Across town, Jack Morrison sat in his garage. The photograph of Lily was still on his workbench. It always would be. But when he looked at it now, the grief that usually overwhelmed him was tempered by something else. Gratitude. Gratitude that he'd had 6 years with her. Gratitude that her death had led him to a purpose. Gratitude that in trying to save other children, he'd found a way to keep Lily alive. He picked up the photograph and spoke to it as he often did. "I met a little girl who reminds me of you," he said softly. "Her name is Emma. She's brave and kind and stubborn, just like you were. I think you would have been friends." He paused. "I know I can't bring you back, Lily. I know I can't change what happened. But I can make sure that your life meant something, that your name is remembered, that children like Emma, kids who are hurting and scared, have someone to protect them." He set the photograph back down gently. "I hope I'm making you proud, baby girl." In the silence of the garage, with only the sound of his own breathing, Jack Morrison felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he was going to be okay. The next morning, Emma woke up early. She put on her prosthetic by herself, something she'd been doing for months now, but still filled Sarah with pride every time. She walked to the kitchen where Sarah was making breakfast. "Mama, can we go to the diner today?" Sarah smiled. "We can go anywhere you want, baby. I want to see Mama Ruth, and I want to draw butterflies, and I want to save one for Uncle Jack so he can put it on his motorcycle." Sarah's heart swelled. "That sounds perfect." They took the car, not the bus. Sarah still wasn't used to having her own vehicle. Every time she turned the key and the engine started, she felt a surge of gratitude for the community that had made it possible. When they walked into Dawson's diner, the bell above the door jingled. Ruth looked up from behind the counter. Her face lit up. "Well, if it isn't my favorite customer." Emma ran to her, moving easily on her prosthetic now. Ruth came around the counter and caught her in a hug. "I heard you had quite the day yesterday," Ruth said. "It was the best day ever, Mama Ruth. 200 motorcycles, and I wasn't even scared." Ruth looked at Sarah over Emma's head. There was a question in her eyes. Sarah nodded, smiling. They were okay, more than okay. Miguel came out of the kitchen carrying a plate of pancakes shaped like butterflies. "Special order for our special girl," he said, setting it down at Emma's favorite booth. Emma gasped. "You made them into butterflies?" Miguel grinned. "I've been practicing." As Emma ate, she chattered happily about the ride, about the wind and the noise and the way Uncle Jack's motorcycle sounded like thunder, about the children who had touched her prosthetic and said it was beautiful, about her pinky promise with Jack. Ruth and Sarah listened, exchanging glances that said everything words couldn't. This child was going to be okay. More than okay. She was going to change the world. Halfway through breakfast, the door opened again. Tyler and Gerald Marsh walked in. The diner went quiet for a moment. Old habits die hard. For months, the sight of Gerald Marsh had meant trouble. But Ruth walked over with a smile. "Morning, gentlemen. What can I get you?" Gerald looked surprised, grateful. "Coffee, please, and whatever Tyler wants." Tyler looked at Emma's table. Emma saw him and waved. "Come sit with me," she called out. Tyler looked at his father, who nodded. The teenager walked over to Emma's booth and slid in across from her. "Hi, Emma." "Hi, Tyler. Look, Miguel made me butterfly pancakes." Tyler smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. "Those are pretty cool. Do you want one?" Emma pushed the plate toward him. Tyler's eyes got wet. "Sure, thanks." They sat together, a 17-year-old boy who had once been a bully and a 6-year-old girl who had taught him about grace, sharing butterfly pancakes in a diner that had witnessed both the worst and best of humanity. Gerald stood at the counter with Ruth. "How's he doing?" Ruth asked quietly, pouring coffee. "Better," Gerald said. "Therapy is helping. The volunteer work is helping. But mostly," he paused, "mostly it's knowing that he did something terrible and that little girl still sees good in him." It makes him want to be the person she thinks he is. Ruth nodded. That's Emma's gift. She makes people want to be better. Gerald looked over at his son and Emma. How do I repay that? How do I repay what she did for Tyler? For me? Ruth smiled. You already are. By being a father, by showing up, by doing the work. She paused. And by making sure that what happened in this diner never happens to another child. That's how you repay it. Gerald nodded slowly. The Emma's Butterflies program at the schools, that's just the start. I'm working with the county to expand it. Training for teachers, resources for families, safe reporting systems for kids. He looked at Ruth. I can't undo what Tyler did, but I can make sure the system changes so that the next kid who gets bullied has somewhere to turn. Ruth put her hand over his. That's exactly right. As the morning wore on, more people filtered into the diner. Regulars who had been coming for years. New faces who had heard the story and wanted to support the place where it all began. Walter came in at his usual time, walked straight to Emma's table. Good morning, young lady. Good morning, Mr. Walter. He looked at Tyler. Morning, son. Tyler straightened. Morning, sir. There was weight in that exchange. Respect earned through change. Walter had watched Tyler transform over the past year, had seen the volunteer hours, the therapy sessions, the genuine effort. And Walter, who carried his own shame from that terrible day, recognized the work it took to become better. I'm proud of you, boy, Walter said simply. Tyler's eyes filled. Thank you, sir. Walter nodded and moved to his booth. The day passed in a gentle rhythm. Breakfast became lunch. Lunch faded into early afternoon. Emma drew butterflies on napkins. Sarah drank coffee and chatted with Ruth. Miguel cooked and occasionally came out to check on his favorite customer. Around 2 in the afternoon, the door opened and Jack Morrison walked in. He wasn't in his leathers this time, just jeans and a t-shirt, but his presence still commanded attention. Uncle Jack. Emma slid out of the booth and ran to him. He caught her and lifted her up. Hey, Butterfly, I heard you were here. Did you come for pancakes? Jack looked at Ruth, who was already pouring coffee. I came to see my favorite girl. He carried Emma to the booth and sat down with her on his lap. I have something for you, Emma said. She pulled out a napkin with a carefully drawn butterfly. I made this for you, for your motorcycle. Jack took the napkin like it was made of gold. This is perfect, sweetheart. I'll put it right on my handlebars. Really, really. Emma beamed. Sarah watched from across the table. Watch this man, this giant of a man with tattoos and scars and a reputation that made most people nervous, hold her daughter with the gentleness of someone holding the most precious thing in the world. She reached across and squeezed Jack's free hand. Thank you, she said, for being her hero. Jack shook his head. I'm not her hero, she's mine. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Dawson's Diner. Outside, the world continued. Cars drove by. People went about their lives. The universe spun on indifferent and infinite. But inside that diner, something sacred was happening. A community had formed, not through blood or obligation, but through choice, through showing up, through standing between a child and the cruelty of the world, through 65 motorcycles and a butterfly drawn in crayon, through falling down and getting back up, through forgiveness and grace, and the stubborn radical belief that broken things can be made whole. Emma climbed down from Jack's lap and went to the window. She pressed her face against the glass and looked out at the street. Mama, she said, I can see the whole world from here. Sarah joined her at the window. What do you see, baby? Emma pointed. I see the street where the motorcycles came. I see the sky where the butterflies fly. I see people walking and cars driving and birds sitting on the telephone wires. She turned to look at her mother. And I see us right here together. Sarah knelt down and pulled Emma close. That's right, baby. We're right here together. And we're never going to be alone again. Emma smiled and rested her head on Sarah's shoulder. The two of them stood there silhouetted against the afternoon light, while behind them the diner buzzed with life and laughter and love. Jack watched from the booth. Ruth watched from the counter. Tyler and Gerald watched from their table. Miguel watched from the kitchen door. Walter watched from his corner booth. All of them witnesses to this moment. All of them changed by a little girl who refused to stay broken. And in the parking lot outside, if you look closely, you could see the faint oil stains where 65 motorcycles had once stood. A reminder that when the world breaks a child, there are still people who will drop everything and ride through the rain to put her back together. Because that's what heroes do. They show up. They stand in the gap. They hold the broken pieces until they're ready to be whole again. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they have loud motorcycles and leather vests and hearts big enough to save the world one butterfly at a time. Emma turned from the window and looked around the diner at all the faces watching her. "I love you all," she said simply. And every single person in that diner, from the 61-year-old biker to the 81-year-old greeter to the 17-year-old reformed bully to the 65-year-old waitress to the cook and the mother and everyone in between, said it back. "We love you too, Emma." Because love, they had learned, was the loudest engine of all. And kindness, it turned out, was the greatest ride. And a little girl with butterflies on her leg had taught them all how to fly.